The name Green River Killer may be unfamiliar to you today, but in the early 1980s, it was a phrase that swept through Washington state like a cold wind. Parents who once let their teenagers walk alone suddenly kept them inside. Newspapers stopped using phrases like murderer or suspect, and instead printed bold headlines that sounded like warnings. For years, the identity behind that terrifying name remained a ghost, but the reality was far more chilling. The killer wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was a soft-spoken factory painter named Gary Leon Ridgway, a man who blended into society so well that even people who worked beside him every day would later say they never imagined what he was doing after dark. Ridgway's killing spree began on July 15, 1982, when two boys spotted something caught on a log in the Green River near Seattle. It wasn't debris. It was the body of 16-year-old Wendy Lee Caulfield. The medical examiner noted the same horrifying pattern that would later become Ridgway's murderous signature. Wendy had been overpowered, strangled with intense force, and left in the water as though discarded. Police hoped it was a one-time tragedy, until a month later, when 3 more bodies were discovered floating in the same stretch of river. All 3 were young women. All 3 had been killed the same way. And all 3 showed signs of the same terrifying routine that pointed to a single perpetrator. Over the next weeks and months, bodies kept appearing, not only in the river, but in wooded areas, brushy trails, and lonely dumping grounds just off rural roads. Investigators began noticing patterns. The victims were mostly runaways, teenage girls who had fled difficult homes, and sex workers who worked along Pacific Highway South. They were vulnerable, isolated, and easy targets for a man who knew exactly how to blend in. Ridgway would cruise slowly through the area in his truck, speaking softly, sounding harmless. He had a practiced calmness that made him appear trustworthy. Once a victim stepped inside his truck, he would drive to remote areas he knew intimately. And then, without warning, his demeanor changed. He would reach from behind, clamp down on a throat with immense pressure, and keep squeezing with chilling patience until the body stopped fighting. According to detectives, the crime scenes often showed only brief signs of struggle. Ridgway killed quickly, efficiently, and without hesitation. After the murders, Ridgway often lingered around the bodies. Sometimes he returned to them days later, moving them deeper into the woods, positioning them intentionally, or revisiting the scenes as though they were part of some secret ritual only he understood. Investigators later described the woods as feeling owned by him, quiet places where the air still seemed to hold the terror of what had happened. Despite the growing death toll, Ridgway continued to live an utterly normal life. He went to work at the truck factory every morning, joked with co-workers, ate lunch alone in silence, then went home to his wife. He attended neighborhood barbecues, paid his bills, and kept his lawn mowed. It was this bizarre double life that made him so difficult to catch. In 1982, police actually questioned Ridgway after a witness reported seeing a missing girl step into a truck identical to his. But Ridgway calmly agreed to take a polygraph test, and passed. DNA testing in the early 80s was primitive, nowhere near capable of matching the biological evidence left on the victims to an individual suspect. So Ridgway walked out of the police station a free man, and the killing continued. By 1984, so many bodies had been found near the Green River that the media officially coined the name the Green River Killer. Fear consumed the community. A special task force was formed with some of the best detectives in the state. They combed through acres of dense forest, drained parts of the river, and collected every shred of evidence they could find. Still, Ridgway stayed steps ahead of them. He changed his routines, altered his patterns, and kept manipulating his facade as an ordinary, unremarkable man. All the while, he murdered with chilling consistency. At his peak, he was killing more than one victim per week. In 1987, investigators collected Ridgway's hair and saliva during a sweep of old suspects. But again, science couldn't link him to the crimes. For 14 more years, he lived openly in society, marrying again, maintaining his job, and even becoming a trusted employee. The task force slowly shrank as leads dried up. Many detectives retired without ever knowing how close they had come to the killer they had hunted for so long. Everything changed in 2001. DNA technology had finally advanced to the point where old evidence could be retested. When forensic analysts examined semen samples collected from victims in the early 80s, they found what investigators had been chasing for nearly 2 decades: a definitive match to Gary Leon Ridgway. Paint particles found on one victim's clothing were traced back to the exact kind of paint Ridgway used every day at his job. It was over. On November 30th, 2001, Ridgway was arrested as he left the factory parking lot. Even then, he maintained a cold, emotionless denial. It wasn't until prosecutors offered to remove the death penalty in exchange for full cooperation that Ridgway finally spoke, and what he revealed shook even the most hardened investigators. He admitted he had no idea how many women he'd killed. He remembered the woods, the river, the secluded roads, the way he positioned the bodies, but not their names. He estimated his victim count was probably between 70 and 90. Detectives believed it was even higher, possibly more than 100. Ridgway also revealed the origins of his violent hatred. Growing up in a chaos-filled household, he witnessed constant fights between his parents, many triggered by his father visiting sex workers. His mother punished him harshly for wetting the bed, adding anger and confusion to his already unstable childhood. His rage toward women grew over time, mingling with deep resentment and emotional dysfunction. He admitted that targeting sex workers felt like striking at the same type of women who had torn his family apart, and, in his twisted mind, like striking back at his own mother. In the end, Gary Ridgway pleaded guilty to 48 murders, though investigators believe there are many victims who may never be found. He was sentenced to 480 years in prison with no possibility of parole, a punishment designed to ensure he dies behind bars. Today, he lives in near total isolation, 23 hours a day in a concrete cell with no sunlight, no normal human contact, and no chance of ever leaving. For a man who spent years turning the quiet forests and riverbanks of Washington into silent burial grounds, many believe this punishment is fitting. A life lived entirely alone, in darkness, with only the memory of his own horrors to keep him company.